Okay, so you went online, you got your butt whipped, and the other guy said, "Lol, get good," and you really do want to get good, but how do you do that? What makes the other player better than you? Lots of people who look for guides end up finding the flashiest techniques or combos and think that'll help them win, but this isn't how you get better at the game, at least not when you're just starting out. In order to get good at fighting games, it really boils down to the fundamentals, which I would call fighting game theory. No, not that game theory, I mean theory like color theory or music theory. But before we get into theory, there's something we need to discuss first. If you want to get good at a game, first you need to know how to actually play it.
Hopefully that was obvious to you, but we have to start somewhere.
If your game has a tutorial, play it before doing anything else. If your game doesn't have a tutorial, find one online.
And if there isn't a tutorial online, check the controller settings or just mash every button until you find out what they do. In other words, play the game until you're familiar with it to the point where you don't have to mash buttons to win. At this point, you don't even have to play against other people. As long as you can control your character in the way you want to, you're good. If you forget what a button or move does, then you either aren't practicing enough or you don't have a main. I strongly recommend choosing a main when you're trying to learn a fighting game. If you switch between characters, you'll have to deal with multiple movesets on top of the game's mechanics, and that on top of the fundamentals, which can slow down your progress. Playing just one character will reduce the number of factors and make it easier for you to learn these fundamentals. Fighting games are basically a more complicated version of rock, paper, scissors. If we look at Smash, there's three main options you can do: attack, shield, and grab. Shield beats attack, grab beats shield, and attack beats grab. So generally, all you have to do is predict what the opponent is going to do and punish it. There are several ways you can do this. Reading, when you guess what the opponent will do based on their playstyle and patterns. Baiting, when you try to get the opponent to react a certain way so that you can punish them for it. And conditioning, when you create a pattern to make the opponent react a certain way so that you can punish that reaction. However, trying to constantly guess what the opponent is trying to do and getting it right for every exchange in the match can be pretty risky, especially when you take into account the fact that fighting games aren't just matches of rock, paper, scissors. Shield might beat attack generally, but there's some exceptions like March Shield Breaker, which is an attack that beats shields. There's also jumping, which beats some attacks but not others, dodging, which makes you temporarily invincible in exchange for vulnerability afterwards, and super armor, which beats out attacks but still lets the user take damage. So instead of the simple rock, paper, scissors format we had earlier, now we have a huge array of options that looks totally different. With all this in mind, how are you supposed to avoid getting overwhelmed? Well, what if I told you there was a way to beat all of these options? If you stay outside your opponent's range, they can't hit you. This is a basic concept, but it's overlooked by a lot of people. Of course, the opponent is able to move, and along with that, their range will move with them, but all you have to do is move outside that new range to avoid getting hit. However, just running away from the opponent won't help you win the game. First of all, you still have to attack them to win, and second of all, you'll risk backing yourself into a corner, which will limit your options. So, you have to position yourself with purpose. This is spacing, positioning yourself advantageously. Usually this will mean staying right outside of your opponent's range, far enough to dodge, but close enough to attack. This can cause the opponent to whiff, or miss an attack. If the opponent whiffs, you can usually attack them while they're still vulnerable. This is known as a whiff punish. This is also why movement is such an important part in fighting games. Being able to position yourself properly in any given moment in a match will help you a lot in winning. For a starting point on how you space, learn your opponent's range. Find a range where the opponent can throw out a move that you cannot react to. Mario, for example, has a pretty small range. He can throw out jabs, tilts, instant aerials, instant dash attack, and instant dash grab, but these don't cover a very large area. If you stay outside this area, you can react to anything he does. He can throw out projectiles or dash up to you, but either way you have time to react to any of his actions. Meanwhile, for characters with more range or speed, you'll have to keep a larger area around them to space yourself. The most important thing to remember is to position yourself in a way that will give you an advantage over the opponent. Risk and reward can be summarized in a single sentence: is it worth it? Lots of new players like using the flashiest, coolest moves they can find, but those are usually the moves with the highest risk. Even if they also have high reward, high-risk moves will generally lead to inconsistent results, which isn't something you want if you're planning on winning consistently. Pokes are moves that are usually quick and safe, meaning that they're also low risk. If a move is safe on block, that means the opponent can't punish you after blocking it. Because of this, pokes are essential in figuring out the opponent's habits, among other things. For example, if I use Diddy's down tilt, I can watch the opponent to see how they react. Then I can either punish them on reaction or abuse it as a habit later on. Even though it's a lot less flashy, it works, and may or may not be the reason why Diddy's so annoying. Of course, that doesn't mean high-risk moves don't have a place in fighting games, but you can't just throw them out recklessly. There needs to be a reason for it. For example, if I realize that the opponent has a habit of rolling from the ledge, I can use the smash attack as a hard read, which will result in a huge punish. But if I want to be safer, I can do a soft read and cover multiple options, which will be lower risk but also lower reward, resulting in a smaller punish. When you and the opponent are at a neutral standing, this is what's known as the neutral. The best example of this is at the beginning of a match, where you and the opponent are both equally able to fight to gain the advantage. If you, for example, land a combo starter, you're now at the advantage state, and the opponent is at the disadvantage state. The point of labeling parts of the match like this is so that you can categorize each part of it. For example, a common question I hear is, what should I do as this character in the neutral? Effective options change depending on the state of the match, and you need to learn these options if you want to play well. Even though I wasn't able to cover everything in this video, which might be impossible anyway, I hope this will give you a good starting point. But I should give you a warning, one that I don't think people get very often. You will lose, and you're going to lose, over and over and over again. Because fighting games are hard. Maybe harder than any other game you've played before. But I can tell you that playing competitive fighting games is like nothing else. It's brought me a sort of satisfaction that casual play would never be able to. And if you have more fun playing competitively than casually, then that would make it worth it, don't you think? Before you go, there's a few people I wanted to thank. First of all is Woof, who I couldn't have finished this video without. He helped me write the script and even edited some of the video. There's also Saffron, who helped with some of the script too. And of course, lots of others who helped in various ways, like the people who encouraged me to finish and creators of guides I took reference from. Speaking of which, I recommend you go to the description below for other videos that should help add onto the bare bones I've hopefully created. I'm also thinking about making a follow-up video, and if I follow through with that, it should appear right here. If not, then good luck and happy fighting!